Hello, Gen Genies. Before we get started, Rich and I want to let you in on some exciting updates for our Patreon subscribers.
Patreon is a site where listeners can pledge a small monthly amount, either $5 or $10, to support the cost of bringing you your favorite podcast.
All patrons get early access to new CutOff Jeans episodes before they're released to the public.
And along with our undying gratitude, you'll also be able to join our special patron-only Facebook group.
But the most exciting new perk is exclusive access to essays I'm writing from my upcoming memoir. And you guys can help me be editors.
New Patreon supporters will also get a shout-out on the podcast.
Rich and I enjoy bringing you the CutOff Jeans podcast and would mean so much if you would consider supporting our labor of love.
Just go to patreon.com/CutOff Jeans podcast.
Thank you all so much, my Gen Genies.
And now, on with the show.
Is your family tree a mystery? Are you fascinated by genealogy? Well, hip, hip, hooray, let's talk DNA with Julie.
The truth is in your genes.
In CutOff Jeans.
Welcome to CutOff Jeans, the podcast that helps you find your truth using nothing but DNA. I'm Julie Dixon Jackson. I'm a genetic genealogist, henceforth known as a Gen Genie.
And I am Richard Castle, the co-host and producer of this podcast. How's everything going, Julie?
Oh, everything is fine.
That's good to hear.
How's everything going with you?
Oh, good. I've just been super busy with my musical and, lots of meetings with artistic directors and the director, and it's all going so well. And if we don't end up in nuclear war by June, my show Love Stings will be opening at Northern Sky Theater. I'm very excited.
Northern Sky Theater. When is casting going to happen?
We just cast it, and I got to watch some of the auditions on YouTube that, people did self-tapes and things like that. And, oh my gosh, really happy. Some of the cast
good.
I already knew because they were in the workshops and some of the other previous rehearsals that we had done for it over time.
Right.
And they're all terrific, but somebody else had dropped out recently, and they sent me some tapes, and really fun. I love casting. It's frustrating because you're like, I want to hire everybody.
Yeah. Yeah, casting's fun. It's fun being behind the table.
Yes.
In the rare times that I've had a chance to do that.
Probably more fun than being the person who's doing the auditioning in front of the table, right?
Always more fun than that. Not fun. I have not auditioned for something in so long. I don't even remember what it's like.
Every day is an audition, Julie.
Ain't that the truth?
What's happening in DNA news?
Okay, well, if we're going to say what's happening in DNA, I have a question about something.
Oh, okay.
That maybe the listeners can help, because I've researched and I can't find the answer to it. Do you remember the Shari Papini case?
The name is familiar.
Okay, so she was this woman from Redding, California. I think it was in 2016 that went missing.
Yes,
and she was gone
read
for
about
3
this.
weeks.
Yes.
Right. And then on, I guess it was Thanksgiving, she was found walking on a street in Redding, and she was in chains, and she'd been branded, and the story was that she had been kidnapped by 2 Hispanic women who were sex traffickers, and she'd been tortured and branded and all this stuff.
Yes.
It sounded very strange.
It was horrific. Sounded horrific. Yes.
It sounded horrific. Right.
However,
so we haven't heard much about it for quite a while, but stuff has been going on behind the scenes, apparently. There was DNA on some of her clothing that she was wearing, male DNA.
Yes.
And they took a sample of it, and what ended up happening was they were able to match that DNA with a relative of an ex-boyfriend of hers from Southern California. And when they went to him, he's like, "Oh yeah, she was with me." That's the whole thing. So she had run away, or she had actually been talking to him behind the scenes. Apparently there was nothing romantic going on anymore. But she had asked him to come get her and take her back with him to Southern California, and she was in his apartment in Costa Mesa for 3 weeks.
Now, wasn't she married as well?
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So she was missing, and her husband didn't know where she was either.
And children, yeah.
And children.
Nobody knew where she was. Yeah. So she, and he said, yeah, I did. She had told him that her husband was abusive and she needed to get away from him. And so that's why he sheltered her. The story is that she was actually having an online affair with another guy, a doctor from somewhere else, some other state, who was supposed to be coming to San Francisco, and she wanted to meet up with him in San Francisco. And at the last minute, he decided he didn't want to meet with her, and she still was like ready to get out. And so that's when she called the ex-boyfriend to come get her. Strange.
And again, why did you include or involve the police in this? Like, it's crazy to me. Like,
the amount of money of resources that were used to find her, as well as like hundreds of thousands of dollars in GoFundMe.
Oh, yeah. And not to mention like the emotional currency of the people who loved her or cared about her, who didn't know where she was, like her kids and presumably her husband, you know.
Exactly.
I mean, he may not feel that way now, but he probably at the time.
Don't think they're together now. She just got released from jail, but she's going to trial. Anyway, my question was this: how did, from the first article that I read about it, said that they had put the DNA in a genealogy database and used genetic genealogy. And something, I can't find it now, but something had said that his mother's DNA was in there, and that's how it was so easy to find him. I can't find that now, and now my question was, well, what database and who ordered to have that DNA turned into an autosomal file, and what database was it put into?
But it would have been the DNA of the ex-boyfriend's mother, is what you're saying, right? Because
no, it would have been it would have matched the DNA of the ex-boyfriend's mother.
That's what I meant. Yes.
Right. But so once they found, so they figured out whatever that DNA was, whoever it was related to somebody who was an ex-boyfriend of her. Then they surreptitiously collected DNA from this ex-boyfriend's property or outside of his property, an ICT container, and it was his.
Yeah. And now he did nothing wrong, right? Like he didn't know.
No, except for he knew that she was in the news and that they were looking for her.
He could have stepped forward and said,
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So I'm not sure what's going to happen to him. But but I'm still, and the reason I'm saying this is because I want to get a clear answer as to how did they do this? What did they, because some of the articles and what people are saying to me now is that it was put into an offender database, which his mother wouldn't have been in.
No.
And they don't, and that database also doesn't use autosomal.
And I'd also like to know if she allegedly had no sexual relationship with this ex-boyfriend in all that time that she was gone and missing. What DNA did they extract and from her clothing?
Well, yeah.
Right?
Here's the thing. Yes, although they're both saying that there was no sexual interaction.
Well, okay, but let me just say that I think that that's bull, because honestly, if she claimed that she was kidnapped and for sexual trafficking, they probably did like rape kits and that kind of thing on her, and that's where they found this stuff.
No, they found it on her clothes.
Well, still.
And frankly, and I'm going to say this just because that's what the pictures that I've seen of this guy. He's not someone who looks like her would be attracted to anymore.
He's no Tom Selleck. That's a callback from last week.
Once again, he is no Tom Selleck. Bless his heart. Unless maybe I don't know. Yeah. And I don't know if it was even sexual DNA.
Right. It could have been like a hair or something, right, from his head or something.
No, I think I don't know.
No,
I don't know. But I'm just curious as to what the truth is as to how they did this, the DNA, because the only one you legally can do that with is GEDmatch,
right? Without
a court order. And in fact, I think the companies, I think like Ancestry has been denying court orders. So, and as I've said before, I do not have a lot of luck with JetMatch. Maybe if I had months and months and unending resources, I could, pull something together. But, I rarely get very close matches on JetMatch for any of my cases.
It's funny because we always read about DNA was used to solve this cold case murder or, something like that. And here's a case where it really did her in. She really screwed herself because by allowing, by making up this crazy story where people were looking for Hispanic women that might have kidnapped her. And, which again, look at the racial overtones of that. Right?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. And there's also, there's, of course, stuff is coming out now from exes and people who knew her that she's a sociopath anyway, that she's a pathological liar, which doesn't surprise me at all. She meets all the criteria.
Well, let's just hope in this case that the DNA puts her away.
She's certainly going to be fine. She's going to have to pay back those resources.
Yeah.
Certainly. And I would think she would do some time. I don't know.
I don't know either, but I think for the amount of fear that she instilled in the people in her community after they heard that she had been kidnapped and they're locking their doors and they're watching not going out at night because they're afraid to be kidnapped. And not to mention the fact that because when she came back and said it was Hispanic women, people start to do racial profiling. And it's
what's up with that? Why does somebody have to accuse somebody of a minority if they're making something up, like it's going to be more believable or something?
I don't know. I don't understand it, and it's deplorable.
Mm-hmm. Agreed. So anyway, if I would like more information.
Yeah, we'll have to follow that story and see if it ever comes out, how did they match that up and through what process, through what website.
Yeah, I'm very curious. Yeah. I'd really, because it's still so muddy as to what is possible. I would love to be able to work for a local police agency and do this kind of work.
Are you listening, local police agencies in Los Angeles?
I have those capabilities as long as they have the ability to use an outside lab to turn existing DNA into an autosomal DNA file that can be then uploaded. It's something that I can do, and I have the resources.
Yes, and not to mention, I would think, even just talking about this, that it would be very satisfying to solve some of these cases. Whether it's some horrible woman that lied about something and used up resources of the community, or much worse, a murder or a rape or something. The fact that you could help solve these cases would be really, really gratifying, I would imagine.
Yeah. Oh, I would love to do that. Are you listening, Parabon? Hi, Parabon. I'd love to come work for you. Okay. So that was my first little thing that I've been wondering about.
Yeah.
Okay. Second part. So about my presence on the TikTok.
TikTok, yeah.
And I was thinking about this lately. We're coming up on our 4th anniversary of this podcast.
Are we really? Oh my gosh.
4-year anniversary. And when in some of the older, especially the first 100 even, podcasts, I would talk about adoption as if these things that happened, the way that adoption was handled, the way that adoptees were treated, the way that biological mothers were treated, was just in the baby scoop era. And they've come so far, and it's really not like that now. And I am prepared to say I was wrong.
Really?
Yes. The more I am in contact with other adoptees, biological mothers, and people outside of the triad that have their own opinions about it, the more I realize that adoption reform is still nowhere near where it needs to be. I spend, whenever I post something on on TikTok specifically about adoptee trauma, about the primal wound, about my personal experience, I will always get comments from people that are, on a daily basis, people will call me ungrateful. They'll defend my adoptive parents' motives for secrecy. They'll deny that adoption is trauma because they know happy adoptees. They asked me if I would rather have been aborted.
Oh my gosh.
because of and think that I should be anti-abortion because I'm an adoptee. That's the line. There's so much drama. There's drama. There's infighting amongst adoptees and first mothers because first mothers have trauma too, but some of the adoptees think that first mother's trauma should never be compared to the trauma of adoptees, and which is worse. And it's just it
can get ugly.
Yeah, it can get ugly, and everybody needs to simmer down, first of all.
I think everybody should also just respect that we don't know everything. You only have your own experience, and you can only imagine, you can only have empathy for what someone else might have gone through. Of
course, and most people do, but there was something a few days ago about a first mom saying adoption trauma was taking adoption trauma, like first moms suffer adoption trauma as well, which is true, which is absolutely true. And a lot of first moms, there are some adoptees, and this has to do with the lack of maturity as well, but there are some adoptees who are like, well, you still made that choice. And they say, but I was coerced. And they say, well, coercion doesn't mean it wasn't a choice. It's still, anyway, the bottom line is coercion is still a thing.
Yes.
And as far as adoption reform goes, and I am not anti-adoption, I'm not one of those, but there are very specific things that need to happen in adoption reform. And here's what I think needs to happen.
Okay.
No anonymity. There should be no anonymity. Nobody should ever be denied who they are and where they came from. First thing. And no name changes. I mean, if an adopted child, their name is going to be changed, at least their last name. But if I don't know, I go back and forth about this because I know that there's a name on my birth certificate that is not the name I was raised with.
Right.
And though, I don't know what I was called for the first 2 months in my life in the Methodist baby's home.
Right.
I had a name. So did they call me that name? And then my parents just, there's a muddy area too about that. My parents told me that they didn't know my name, but later I discovered that they absolutely knew my name and just opted not to tell it to me. So that's a whole other thing. Most important thing, all adoption reform should be centered on the adoptee, meaning what is in the best interest of the child.
Oh, I agree with that too. I totally
whether
agree with that.
Whether that be family preservation, whether that be listening to lived experiences of adoptees instead of saying, oh, I know an adoptee, they're perfectly happy, they've never had any trauma. That's just not based in truth and fact. And I will say that there are I know many adoptees too. And some say they have no trauma, but their life choices are telling me they had a lot of trauma. So, if you're someone who says that you have no trauma, but you choose to, abandon every child you've ever had, I think that's a trauma reaction.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So family preservation is the ultimate goal. If that can't happen, there should always be an open door to the biological family. There should always be information about the biological family. And there should also be lifelong trauma therapy for adoptees. It should be something that is just a part of their curriculum in life, because it's a resource that is never offered. And also mandatory adoption-informed therapy for prospective adoptive parents as well. I believe. One other thing, and that's I thought about this when I was thinking about things I used to say about adoption. Open adoption is certainly more of a thing now. What I didn't realize and have discovered since then is that open adoption is not legally binding. So parents can promise that they will keep in touch with this biological mother and make sure that the door is kept open. But if they choose to close that door, the biological mother there's nothing she can do about it unless she can afford a very expensive lawyer. And usually she can't. That's why she had to relinquish her child in the first place.
Yeah, I mean, I understand what you're saying. I just feel like it's such a blanket statement in that, like, we've talked about people where their birth mothers were addicted to drugs or in and out of jail, or people who were not fit, quite frankly, to be a parent. And so I wonder if sometimes an adoptive family might choose to cut off that relationship because it's an unhealthy one.
I think that maybe perhaps that happens sometimes.
And that,
but
once the child is old enough to make the decision for themselves, once they are, emancipated, once they are 18, I think that it should definitely be there, and it's their choice. I just wonder. And again, I am not part of the triad, so it's hard for me to even speak to this. But from the experience of talking about all these different families, I just know if I were the parent of a child, if I adopted a child, and I knew that the adoptive mother or the birth mother was an unfit parent, I might choose to monitor or cut off that relationship because of that.
Absolutely. But that is also why there should be court-mandated social workers always attached to that person, to that adoptee, so that they can make an informed decision about that. I don't think that any adoptive parent should be able to randomly make that choice, because more often than not, it's just because they're not comfortable anymore with it. I hear and I validate your point, and I know that is a thing, but the privilege is on the side of the adoptive parents, usually financially, and as far as, again, the most privileged party in the industry, the multi-billion-dollar industry of adoption, is the adoptive parent. And their experience is the one that is the most cared about.
I will only add that I feel like when a parent gives up a child for adoption, that they are sort of signing off on some of these rights. And I don't mean, it's a voluntary decision, whether or not they're
most of the time.
Most of the time. Yes. And if they're making that decision, they are giving up the right to be the parent to that child. And I understand what you're saying in terms of, like, in a perfect world, this would be this wonderful relationship between all three parties, between the adoptive parent, the birth parent, and the child. But we know that there is no perfect world, and that I just wonder when we make blanket statements like that we're not including some of the more difficult relationships.
Well, I think in the way that it is done, it's going to be built in that it is a case-by-case basis.
Sure.
But
I mean, I know what you're saying, and your heart is so in the right place. And as far as I agree, people should have therapy, and there's trauma involved and all of that. I totally agree. I'm thinking realistically, I guess, in terms of real life situations with people, especially just since we talked about them on this podcast.
Yeah.
Like what happens to this woman we just talked about, Shari Papini's kids, when she took off on them and for however long she was gone, saying she was kidnapped. Like, she's an unfit mother, in my opinion.
Yeah. I don't know.
You know? And
I don't know.
that's not even a case of adoption. I've just,
Right.
you know, but again, I just.
Oh, it's going to be harder to take those kids away from her.
Yeah. Oh, sure.
Certainly.
Yes.
Because she is their biological mother, even though, and I think her oldest child is not her husband's. I think it's from a previous marriage or relationship.
Well, you know, I'm just using that as an example. I'm just, you know.
Yeah, no, I hear what you're saying, and I appreciate that point of view and realize that there is nuance to everything.
Yes.
But as a whole, I don't think adoption should be a multi-billion-dollar industry. I don't think adoption agencies should be for profit. Because that there's a very fine line between providing a service and trafficking.
I actually agree with you on this. I think this is a public service. You know, I believe the same about healthcare, quite frankly, you know.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. And but that's my opinion. And I agree with you. When you're talking about, whenever you introduce money into things like this and profit, then I think you're losing the best interest of the parties who are involved.
Right.
Or it's much easier to lose sight of that.
Yeah, that's very true. I got triggered. The reason I started, I started this whole conversation in the first place is that somebody commented and I did a TikTok about it. Somebody commented on another adoptees thing. Babies are blank slates, which is, I mean, that was what agencies used to tell adoptive parents about their babies when in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, that they're blank slates. They have no, there's not going to be any trauma. They're not going to remember any of this. There's no such thing as inherited trauma or just trauma in general if they can't consciously remember it. And that is absolute BS. And I got so triggered when I saw somebody say this, and not just say it, but then double down over and over and over again. And there are so many people who still think that, even though it's been proven that that is not true. So I'm out here fighting the good fight now. I'm certainly more, I guess, radicalized is what certain people would call it regarding adoption trauma and adoption reform. And I get it now that it's more, and now that I've worked with so many other adoptees personally, I'm realizing, because I used to think that my case was extreme and unusual, and it turns out it's not. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Well,
I think that's a good place to stop and take a break.
Let's.
Okay, great.
If you're enjoying our podcast, please subscribe, rate, and review, or consider supporting us on our Patreon page, patreon.com/Cutoff Jeans Podcast. Now back to Julie and me.
All right, we're back. So the first segment, I was rather long-winded. So let's go into this week's story time, shall we? We have Cassandra Adams, who is, well, I won't tell you who she is. Well, she's a listener and an advocate for NPEs, and you will know why after you hear the first part of our conversation.
Great. Let's listen.
Hey, everybody. I have on the line, unbelievably, actually, Cassandra Adams, who is here to tell her story. Welcome, Cassandra.
Thank you so much for having me.
I'm so sorry. We had a little bit of a, full disclosure, everybody, there was a little bit of a problem this morning, and it was completely my fault. But we're here now, and we're going to forget all that happened. And Cassandra is going to tell us her story, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
I've got a story.
Oh, I can't wait to hear it.
I know. It involves surprises and all kinds of things. Just like when preparing for podcasts and events and things. When you take a DNA test and it doesn't quite go the way you think it will.
That sounds foretelling. Okay. So tell us the story.
So I took a DNA test. I took a 23andMe DNA test in August of 2017. And I was not expecting for it to be anything life-shattering. I was hoping that it would enhance some of the research that I had already done into my family history, which was something I had.
So you were
always,
like a hobbyist, a hobby genealogist.
Yes, a hobbyist, very involved in kind of continuing the family tree of both sides of my family.
Mm-hmm.
And the amazing thing was that I got this test for free. They were doing a research study and I qualified.
Oh.
So it was a way to further this without even having to, when these tests first came out, which I was really, truly interested in doing one, even when they first came out, they were like $400.
Yeah, they're expensive
or more.
First. Yeah.
Yeah. So I took this test and, I guess to say, first of all, what I was expecting.
Mm-hmm.
I was raised with my mom, who was born in America but conceived in Italy.
Okay.
My grandparents were, cousins, second cousins.
Okay.
From the same small town in Italy. And they came to America, had my mom here. And so I knew that side. And that was always the side I was a lot more connected to. I thought perhaps just because we were an immigrant family, I was surrounded by people speaking Italian my entire childhood. Every holiday was Italian food. I thought that proximity to the culture was the main reason why I identified more with my mom's side of the family.
Sure.
A lot more demonstrative, all of that.
Mm-hmm.
And my dad's side, so I have to say, Adams is my maiden name, which I kept. My dad's side is very, very what you would call, American at this point. A lot of colonial history, early British settlers, early Dutch settlers, a little smattering of France here, or,
sure.
Scotland,
had you traced
like
that side? Had you traced that side back to when they first came to the U.S.?
I did, yes.
Okay.
With the help of one of my dad's cousins had done that side prior to the advent of the internet. He had done it.
Oh, wow. Okay.
By hand back in the day.
All
and
right.
So he was kind enough many years ago to share his research with me. And then once Ancestry had put all the records online, I was able to go through and confirm a lot of his work. Not every single bit. There were mistakes here and there, but he was on the right track.
Right.
So I was actually, in a sense, more interested to see what my dad's pie chart, what that half of my pie chart would look like.
Sure.
So that was what I thought going into the DNA test. And when I got my results on September 23rd of 2017, I opened my email and the first thing I saw was 49% Ashkenazi Jewish.
Aha. There it is. Okay.
So that's pretty interesting. And, I was actually just speaking with someone about this just a few minutes ago, really, how you almost feel like it's being a newborn. Being a child, when you have that innocence of not realizing right away that something is very, very wrong.
Right. You go to the, it's a mistake thing immediately. Or there's, they say that this is not real or something like that. I know. Okay.
Yeah. I thought my first instinct was that my Italian grandfather may have been Jewish.
Okay.
He when they came to America, they lived in Brooklyn. My grandfather loved Jewish people.
Okay.
He definitely absorbed elements of the culture living in Brooklyn at that time.
Sure. That wouldn't explain 50% though.
Yes. So I thought that was from him.
Okay.
You know, and I was like, oh, yes, the estimates must be a little funky.
Sure.
But I sent it to my friends. You know, I sent my results to my friends. I'm like, this is really unexpected. And a friend of mine who is also very into genealogy and is Jewish was kind of helping me piece this together throughout the course of the night.
Okay.
And at one point, at about like 4:00 in the morning, my friend, you know, said to me, Cassandra, you know that your dad has British ancestry, you know, primarily from your research. You're 0% British.
Yep. So there's no Northern European other than Italian.
There was a 4% French.
Okay, that's not enough.
And I was convinced for several hours that 4% French was my dad.
Oh, wow.
That was like holding me. That was the anchor.
So it's a slow burn. You went, and so by now, and so you and this friend were going all night, and it's now 4 a.m, and she finally, I wonder how long she'd been like waiting to say that, to see when you were ready.
Yeah, because it was pretty clear. And when I look back, I see now, you know, as you know, they refine the DNA test results. And so now I'm pretty much like 50-50.
Sure.
You know, my pie chart is 50-50. But back then, you know, they had, my Italian was like mostly Southern Europe, but then there was that 4% French. And then there was, you know, like 8%, maybe not 8%, but something percent Spanish. And then there was a significant chunk that was the Middle East, and, you know.
Right.
So it took me until that moment to be like, oh my God, no, that is all Italian. That's my Italian side. And then this 50% is something else.
Right. Right.
So I told my mom, she was coming over the next morning anyway to watch my daughter. And I told her to come a little bit early. And she knew the reason, because I had sent her a message when I thought that maybe my grandfather was partly Jewish.
Okay.
Oh my gosh, Mom, take the DNA test too, because wow, I think, you know, my grandfather, I think he might have been part Jewish, you know. And so she knew what this was going to be about.
Oh boy.
Yeah, she knew. She actually saw me spit into the tube also, and I
gosh,
on her face when that happened also. But of course, I didn't suspect anything at that point.
Wow, interesting. That's so weird that she watched you and still was like, well, maybe this won't show up, or
no.
Interesting. Okay.
It's the level of denial, which I was to learn is very, very deep.
Very, very deep. Okay. So mom gets there.
And I called up 23andMe in the morning. So as soon as their customer service opened, to just ask, like, I knew they were a reputable company, but is there any way that things were mixed up or anything? And no, we have so many safeguards in place that doesn't happen.
Yeah.
Those are your results.
I wonder if they have a department just for that.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, if that's the call, it goes to this this group of people who are specially trained in NPEs.
I think that now they are more attuned to that.
Oh, absolutely. Now everybody's expecting it. I mean, that's probably the majority of the phone calls they get, I bet.
That is, I know. It must be so difficult for them at this point. Because the person I spoke to was just pretty like, you know, didn't really go into it. Just basically reaffirming those were my results. You know, it wasn't a mix up. So then I knew I had to really talk to my mom with the knowledge that this was going to be some kind of secret, or hoping that there would be some kind of explanation.
Yeah.
And so when I did speak to my mom, I had her sit on the couch, and I said, Mommy, he's not my father, is he? Oh. And she started crying, and she said, no, he's not. And, I'm like, what happened? What's going on? Because, what happened? My mom was not that kind of person. I mean, I can't tell you, especially, not that my family was very religiously Catholic, but more culturally so, sure. Being from Italy, and how important it was to only have one partner, and to that was really drilled into me a lot growing up, was how important it was to save yourself for marriage and only be with one person, and how that was my mom's story. And so I could not imagine the next thing to come out of her mouth, because I didn't know how to comprehend it. And she said that my dad had fertility issues, and so they used a sperm donor to conceive me. Oh. After the fact, thinking about this, I'm like, you know what? She did not lie to me. She really had only ever been with one man. Okay. And I think the bizarre part is that she used that fact to erase the whole sperm donor thing
and justify the untruth of the whole thing.
Yes. How would I ever possibly consider that my dad was not my biological father if I knew for a fact that she had only ever been with him?
Right.
Right. And it's really bizarre to feel like that played into the lie somehow. That's one of many things that's bizarre to think about, how it played into it.
Yeah, and how people can justify certain things. Yeah. Are your parents still together?
They are. Okay. They are, yes.
Okay. So what happens next?
Yeah, so I ask, I'm like, oh my gosh, so what? Well, who is, what, do you have papers? Who is this person? What's going on, And what my first thought was my health history. Honestly, my daughter was a year and a half old, and she was playing in the corner of the room while we're having this emotional discussion, this breakthrough, this complete collapse of my self, because as soon as she confirmed, that's when it was all completely true. Yeah. That's when I lost half of who I was.
Right.
And she said they had, she was never given anything. She had no paperwork. She had no idea that they used healthy medical students. And she repeated the word healthy more times than I can ever imagine.
Sure.
That's what they were told. Yeah. That was what was drilled into them. They were healthy. Don't worry about it. It's fine. So I'm like, you never questioned that idea. You never thought maybe, 40-ish years later that there might be some health concerns. It was like the look on her face was completely oblivious. I never thought of that. I never thought 40 years later you might have health concerns.
Yeah. Or care about half of your DNA.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Which is it's insane. It's insane to think about. And
did she? Were they holding on to the thinking that, were they told that they mixed in some of your father's sperm, and so that they could?
It's not specifically. They did in my parents' case, and it was common practice at the time to at mix least sperm.
Say that, right?
They did not in my parents' case. Okay. But they were told to go home and have sex afterwards, which was It was, who knows? I guess it was the doctor's preference, whether you mix it or whether you tell him to go home and have sex.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense, I guess.
A similar idea, but
Yes.
she knew though. She knew.
Sure.
I mean, I think she's told me one time, I think she kind of always maybe hoped in the back of her mind that maybe the donor sperm, I mean, the procedure, the way that doctors described it at the time, it was as if the sickly husband sperm would like hold on to like a lasso, of the healthy sperm, and the healthy sperm would like bring the sick sperm over to the egg and then like say, okay, buddy, here you go. You can dismount now. And
interesting.
That's kind of the science almost that they tried to describe to people.
They tried to explain so people were probably a lot of people, because, not everybody's smart. But a lot of people probably glommed onto that as saying, oh, he's saying that it's a mix of both and that his DNA will be in there too. Maybe.
Right. People thought, but I think I was conceived and born in 1982. And I think by that time they knew it was BS.
Of course.
They really did. I was shocked that she would intentionally hold this from me. And they weren't, again, at the time, some doctors specifically told them not to tell. Some doctors were very adamant about it. There were scare tactics that were used prior to the 1980s about, the donor coming to take the child away, or, if the child knows, then they won't be able to bond with the intended father and stuff. But from what my mom told me, she was not counseled specifically not to tell. She was just it was kind of insinuated, it was kind of like, go home, have sex. Mm-hmm. This will be your child,
Yeah.
Which in some ways makes it harder to digest, because it put more of the burden on my mom and dad to make that decision. Mm-hmm. And so knowing that they made the wrong decision hurts. Yes. I could almost I understand the time period, and I understand the issues regarding stigma and all of that. I really understand. And it's still hard to swallow the idea that they still willingly made that choice.
All right. Thank you for that, Cassandra. We will hear part 2 on episode 509.
Thank you, Cassandra. I am Richard Castle, and if you want to learn more about what I do when I'm not on this podcast, you can go to my website, richardcastle.com, or you could follow me on the Twitter or on Instagram @CastleSongs.
I'm Julie Dixon Jackson. You can find everything about me at cutoffjeans.com, which is my website for my business, Cutoff Jeans Investigations, as well as blogs and the podcast. But you guys know how to get to the podcast. Please direct people to that if you are looking, if they are looking for a genetic genealogist. If you are looking for a genetic genealogist, please reach out to me. I actually have some time on my hands especially before the April 1950 census comes out, because that's gonna be a few days of me having my head buried. And also, if you have a match that wants to know how they're related to you and you can't figure it out, send them in my direction. I'd be happy to help them. Would love to.
Sounds good, Julie. So let's tell everybody what the most important thing is.
Always, the truth is in your genes.